In this video, we're going to talk about triggers. If you've been following along with us as we've built up the gun now, from the buttstock to the pistol grip to the front of the gun, now we're going to start getting into the components. So what we're talking about today is fire control, the trigger specifically itself. Now there's of course a full-time job trying to figure out where to start in the trigger market now, because there's lots of great manufacturers making lots of great triggers, and there's a lot of them out there. So what do we need to know first? I think bringing it back to basic fundamentals, there's two different types of triggers out there, that you're going to put in your carbine. We have single stage trigger and we have a two-stage trigger. So when you're looking at a single stage, which is most likely what you get if you're going to the store and buying a gun, an AR-15 off the shelf, it's probably going to have some mil-spec single stage trigger in it. If you're a law enforcement guy, most of the time you're issued that, or military, you're issued this mil-spec single stage trigger. And basically what it means is that there's one stage of pull. So you have your sear interface and the disconnector interface. So when you start to press through that, it presses and then releases with that whatever pull it is, 4.5, 5.5, or more potentially. And then the hammer releases and strikes the primer. The difference between that and a two-stage trigger is where there's a different sear engagement now on the front of the trigger. And I'm not going to go into too much depth on these. You can certainly get a lot of information out there on triggers and how they actually work, because we don't have the time for that today. But you'll find that there's actually a different disconnect and sear interface on the two-stage trigger, allowing you to have two stages of trigger pull. So that means if I'm going to get on the trigger and start pressing to the rear, you'll feel like this pre-travel, this nice clean pre-travel, like this Geisley trigger right now, which I typically run on my precision rifles or my SPRs. I will pull through about 2.5 pounds of pressure, and then I'll hit that predictable wall where we all know what happens next. Past that wall, the gun goes off. So that next poundage is about 1.5 pounds once I get through the second stage, and then the hammer drops in the primer, gun goes off. So people will typically choose the two-stage if they want a higher level precision, typically. Some people still run it in standard carbines. I just find that there's a lot of issues with a deliberate two-stage trigger. So we'll go into a couple of others, because there are two-stage triggers out there that act and feel just like a single-stage trigger. So once you've learned which one you want, do I want to run a carbine in a class? Do I want it for home defense, law enforcement, military, or do I want to have more of a precision level? That's the choice. So let's talk about the carbine guy. I want to pick this gun up. I want to have it as a defense option. I want to take a class or something. You're probably going to choose more of that single-stage feel. Okay. So if you're running the single stage in a carbine and you think like, hey, I'm ready to move up to the next trigger, just make sure you're ready to do that first. And that's why these manufacturers put those mil-spec triggers in there, so you can get used to that feel. Now, once you get used to it and you get good, efficient trigger control, you can start graduating up now, which is fantastic in today's industry. You can grab triggers like this PNT from BCM, Bravo Company Manufacturing, or Geisley makes some of the best triggers in the world. They make the ACT line, which is just a mil-spec trigger that they've polished the sear interface a little bit more. They view it under a microscope to make sure it's perfect. They Teflon and nickel boron coat them, so it's still that out-of-the-box mil-spec trigger, but it's a little bit more tuned. Okay. Now you start graduating up from there. You get into an advanced applications of shooting. You got trigger control down pretty well. You might want to start looking at some other options. Like me personally, I like running the Geisley Super 3-gun. Even though it was designed for 3-gun competitors, because they want speed and precision. They want to balance both of those together. It's still a two-stage design, which is what's interesting, but it has the feel of a super clean single stage, and it just pops. So I can run this gun fast and hard up close, and I can also lay down rounds very precise out to 700 meters if I needed to. Okay, so that's kind of like the graduation up to the high-end trigger. Again, just as a disclaimer for safety, make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into before you just jump right to a trigger like that. On the precision side, and I'll talk a little bit about how I personally set these up. If I'm running a precision rifle or just kind of a scoped rifle like this 300 Blackout with an ACOG on it, I like to run the flat triggers in there. So we talk about flat versus curved. Well, which one should I use? If I'm running speed, if I'm running a defensive carbine where I need to be in more of a direct action mode, I would rather have a curved trigger because I want that tactile feel consistently throughout the trigger control, which means that my finger never comes off the face of the trigger. When I personally run a flat trigger fast and upright, it's hard for me to maintain contact because it doesn't pull much. It pops right away. So when I go to reset, sometimes my finger will pop off too much, and I'm like, damn it, let's get back on it. The only time it works perfectly on a carbine like this is when I run offset iron sights. So I'll typically move through a space, and if I come up on the iron sights, the way my hand biomechanically lands on the grip, I can actually shoot this trigger faster than a curved trigger in this configuration on a 45-degree angle. Just the way the body works with this particular gun. Again, not everybody is the same way, so you got to figure out what works for you. All right, guys, so the last thing I'll leave you with here is a little trigger control formula that I came up with a long time ago. A lot of people ask, well, how do you shoot so fast? And I'm going to share this tidbit with you where in a class I go into a lot more detail. But for time's sake, think about distance, not speed. Because we tend to pick up these defensive carbines, we come to a class, we go out and shoot, we tend to shoot really fast. And we want to be fast shooters, but we want to be accurate too. So how do we balance both of those better? I want you to think about a little bit of math here. Now, I suck at math, but I'm gonna try to help you out with getting your mind wrapped around something a little bit more detail-oriented on the trigger to make yourself have a higher level of self-awareness and self-intelligence. So think about when you're starting to shoot a gun, we tend to go faster and we tend to slap the trigger. So the more faster we go, the more we slap. So if I gave you a simple number, 10 rounds, you're gonna pick this gun up, I'm gonna fire 10 rounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The faster I go, the more I slap. Now this trigger, on a mil-spec carbine, when you press it, it pulls about 0.086 of an inch. That's nothing, man. That's just a little bit. Now, if I reset that trigger, that's another 0.086, and then therefore I've got 0.172. Okay, so that's all I needed was 0.172 to pull that trigger. All right, now, if I fire the gun 10 times and I slap my finger, which is easy to slap it an inch on, an inch off, an inch on, an inch off. It's very easy. I see it happen a lot in classes. If you fire those 10 rounds and slap 1 inch times 2 each, that's 20 total inches of travel your finger just had to go to make those 10 rounds go off. But what if we could maximize that 0.086 and then the reset 0.086 and then now fire those 10 rounds? What just happened? So basically we're just taking 18.3 inches off of our trigger control, or the distance. So basically instead of firing 20 inches, you only fired 1.7 inches of movement. So now my finger only has to go 1.7 inches if you maximize how much this trigger pulls. So again, just a quick tip, guys, on efficiency and the law of just a little bit when pulling a trigger. I'm Travis Haley. Stay sharp, be safe, and thanks for joining us.